Marvel's first female solo movie outing has had its draw of critics to say the least. Some complaints are legitimate, some not, and while the movie felt for me like a little bit like a placeholder for the tear fest that is Avengers Endgame, it was a solid entry into the MCU. But while we've gotten the likes of Killmonger or Hela or Thanos recently, the greatest villain for Captain Marvel wasn't the Skrulls or her Star Force team that is literally made up of villains. Seriously, one of them was literally a villain in a previous Marvel movie. Captain Marvel's villains weren't aliens or ex-friends or the accusers, it was the writing. Just to be clear before we get started, I liked Captain Marvel. I thought it was a fun movie and I thought a lot of the characters were charming and fun. I don't dislike the movie because I hate women or anything weird.
I am a woman!
What?
I said I am a woman!
What?
And this will be pretty obvious, but I'm gonna spoil the hell out of this movie, so if you haven't seen it, maybe come back to this video a little bit later. Spoiler alerts out of the way, it's clear that the movie's writing was the biggest problem. 3 people worked on the screenplay and 5 people worked on the story, and for as many writers as it had, the movie feels disjointed from the rest of the MCU. Little breaks in lore and events being misaligned are strewn throughout the movie. The 3 big lore breaks for me are the Tesseract, Fury's Eye, and Ronan the Accuser. The Tesseract has been a near constant presence in the MCU. It's the first Infinity Stone we see all the way back in the post-credit scene in Thor back in 2011, and its history is pretty traceable. We know from Thor that Odin brought the Tesseract to Earth centuries ago. It's found by the Red Skull in Captain America the First Avenger, lost in the ocean and found by Howard Stark sometime after the war but before the events of Agent Carter. Then in 2012's Avengers, we see that it's being held at Project Pegasus by S.H.I.E.L.D. and is stolen by Loki. The lore break happens because Captain Marvel is set in 1995. The Tesseract's presence implies that sometime between when Howard Stark found the Tesseract back in the 40s and when Carol finds it in Mar-Vell's lab in 1995, it got into Mar-Vell, or Wendy Lawson's hands, sometime in the late 80s. It's never explained how it got from Howard to Mar-Vell. Howard doesn't die until 1991, but based on info given in Captain Marvel, we know that Lawson's had it since 1989, since that's when Carol's accident happened. And it's never explained why he would allow her to use it for experiments or even if he would. Does sharing or handing out things sound like something a Stark would do?
Don't take my stuff.
The Tesseract is returned back to S.H.I.E.L.D. via Goose, eating it, then spitting it up like a hairball on Fury's desk, as seen in the Captain Marvel post-credit scene, which seemingly fixes its timeline a little, but it's that prior deviation that makes me feel like the Tesseract's presence in the movie was for more the sake of fan service than plot progression. Which leads us to Fury's Eye. I'll admit this is the one that bothers me the most. Played for laughs, Fury loses his eye from a cat scratch, which completely undoes his story in Captain America the Winter Soldier.
Those hostages could have died, Nick.
I sent the greatest soldier in history to make sure that didn't happen.
Soldiers trust each other. That's what makes it an army. Not a bunch of guys running around shooting guns.
Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
You know, they used to play music.
Yeah, my grandfather operated one of these things for 40 years. My granddad worked in a nice building, got good tips. He'd walk home every night, a roll of one stuffed in his lunch bag. He'd say hi, people would say hi back. Time went on, neighborhood got rougher. He'd say hi, they'd say keep on stepping. Granddad got to gripping that lunch bag a little tighter.
You ever get mugged?
Every week some punk would say, what's in the bag?
What would he do?
He'd show him. Bunch of crumpled ones and a loaded .22 Magnum. Granddad loved people, but he didn't trust them very much.
One of the central themes in The Winter Soldier is the conflict and balance between security and freedom. In a world of heightened threats, should an individual's freedom be exchanged for the security of the masses? Fury makes mention of his eye as a warning to Alexander Pierce and to Captain America both. Like he said the last time he trusted someone, he lost an eye. But knowing now that he lost his eye to an alien cat? A flirkin'? Again, it's fan service and it undoes the core theme established in The Winter Soldier, which kind of ruins things on rewatch. Like, how am I supposed to watch these scenes knowing what I know now? And the last one is Ronan, which is super minor but should still be brought up. Near the midpoint of the movie, Yon-Rogg calls for the Accusers to strike Earth because Skrulls were on the planet. Ronan the Accuser shows up at the end to execute a strike, but Carol, being the badass that she is, takes out their weapons and saves the day. The problem is when Ronan says, "We'll be back for the weapon," and the other accuser is like, "But the weapon's destroyed," and Ronan's like, "No, the woman." But then he blows up at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, so he never comes back. Unless by some off chance they use a different accuser for a Captain Marvel sequel and have them hunt after Carol, I don't see how the line was relevant or how it will play out. Maybe that was his "what a woman" line. Either way, it was poor writing and just sequel baiting, or they didn't check continuity when writing this movie, and I don't know which is worse. Writing problems weren't just plot point deep, but character deep. The newish problem with female characters in media is that writers will sterilize their character traits and think that to make them strong, they need to be stoic and unflinching, which just makes them boring. I don't blame writers for making changes to characters' personalities or origin stories to make them more interesting. I just blame them when it's not done well. For the longest time, Carol Danvers just didn't have much of a personality. Even though she appeared in some big Marvel events and Avengers stories, I'll argue that while she was present, she didn't have much of a presence. The biggest aid to her character development for sure was Kelly Sue DeConnick's handling of her starting in 2012. So I can imagine how hard it would be to write a compelling story about a character whose 50-year history is about 80% cardboard. For years, Carol played second banana to Marvel, the OG Captain Marvel, and basically the main cause of her getting her powers and turning into Miss Marvel in the first place. To inject some change into the character, the movie chose to change Walter Lawson to Wendy Lawson, played by Annette Bening. And it made some sense to make that change. In keeping with the strong woman aesthetic, it helps not to have Carol's origin story tied to a man, making it appear that she's not subservient to man or whatever. Ladies helping ladies and all. While I'm personally a little bummed at not getting to see one of my comic book husbands on screen, I'll miss you, Marv. The change is mostly harmless. But my problem with the way they wrote Carol Danvers is that despite changing Marvel from male to female in order to not make her reliant on man and to make her dynamic, it still doesn't feel like she has any agency. In the comics, Carol and Marvel connected because of their similar powers and romance, and this chemistry is missing in the movie. They could have played on this aspect regardless of the sex swap. While Carol has a healthy respect and admiration of Dr. Lawson in the movie, their connection doesn't feel as compelling because she dies soon after and Carol barely knows anything about her. In fact, she doesn't know anything really, because the accident that cost her powers results in her having her memories rewritten by the Kree to cover everything up. Carol is a blank slate of a character, and while that works sometimes, it doesn't make for the most interesting protagonist. This is a common problem with characters that have memory loss. They kind of sleepwalk through their own narrative as they piece everything together. And character development is told in a passive voice, usually in flashbacks or telling instead of showing, rather than in present actions. Tabula rasa or clean slate characters are fine, as long as they change over the course of the story. And I feel like Carol didn't. Let's chat Wonder Woman for a second. I don't want to pit my beautiful queens against each other, but I will for the sake of illustrating my point. Diana starts out as a sheltered warrior princess who is raised for war. She lives on an isolated island, has no concept of the outside world, and has preconceived notions about how the world functions, specifically about men. By the end of the movie, she's changed her perceptions of man, doesn't see humans as inherently evil or good but capable of being both, and realizes that fighting isn't always the best solution to problems. In Captain Marvel, Carol starts out as a strong warrior woman from a proud race of aliens fighting for a cause. At first it's for the honor of the Kree Empire, at the end it's for the Skrulls. Kind of. The writers might have written themselves into a corner by making the Skrulls sympathetic, by portraying them as refugees essentially, if they want to use them for villains later in the MCU phases. While Carol's perceptions about the Skrulls and her Star Force team change, again, they're literally all villains. She's just as strong as she was before, only she's human too. And she goes binary, which was admittedly super cool. The only thing that really changes is that she gets her memories back, because they were inside her all along. But there's no major change in Carol. Beginning of Wonder Woman Diana is naive, while end of Wonder Woman Diana is matured. Beginning of Captain Marvel Carol is strong and confident, and at the end she's still strong and confident. Carol's changes during the movie are physical. She seemingly doesn't have any emotional growth or change. While most of what was done in the movie was done for the sake of fan service for both comic book readers and moviegoers, it serves little if it upends the established MCU canon. Some of these changes can be explained away or dismissible if you don't think about them too hard, but for most Marvel movies you shouldn't have to use moon logic to make them make sense, like with the Tesseract's location or Fury's eye. And as for writing Carol Danvers, she's far from being the only Marvel hero with a one-dimensional personality and lack of character growth. I mean, hell, they had to make Doctor Strange more like Tony Stark in his own movie to make him more interesting as compared to the early iterations of his comic book counterpart. Again, I just want to say that I did like the movie. It was a fun Marvel movie outing, but as far as writing goes, there needed to be maybe a rewrite or two to tighten things up. But what do you guys think? Did you like Captain Marvel as a movie? What are your nitpicks about it, if you have any? Leave a comment down in the pit. Like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Twitter at The Comet Punch. I've been trying to get better about posting on there, and I'm having a lot of fun using it. And thanks again for watching. Alright, bye.